All right. Welcome to episode 2, the BGPerform podcast, or season 2, episode 2. Some season. I don't
hmm
know. I'm calling it
It's a
season 2.
season.
I'm
It's a
calling it
season of
season.
gains.
We're here. Me and Jerry are back. Like we said, we're gonna be consistent with this. I'm excited about it. I love talking to this guy. And I like talking about fitness stuff with this guy. I like talking about a lot of stuff with this dude. So we're here. We got a couple different topics that have popped up, mostly because we've gone through it a bunch of times, and I went through it this morning, and I was like, what better way to have a conversation about getting injured? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this clock. If you listen to the first episode, we got an AM tap going on. We're going to give ourselves 30 minutes to talk about as much as we can regarding to the topic today, and I'm going to hit start. You ready?
I'm ready.
10 seconds.
All right. Just what is AmTap again, Brandon, for the
As
people?
much talking as possible in
All
three,
right.
2, 1. Let's go. All right. So
He said, let's go.
getting injured. This morning, I went through an entire thought process of feeling like kind of okay, kind of not great. And if you don't know, if you've looked at the YouTube or you've been watching anything, I signed up for a triathlon. So the last few weeks, I've been kind of dipping my toes in the water with a lot of this stuff, the biking, the running, but I've still maintained lifting throughout. And I think that before I get into the details of that, injury is always going to come up in some capacity in training. And I think it's important we realize that because we cannot avoid injury at all costs. I think if we learn enough about ourselves and we learn enough about the body, we can make educated decisions, right? Um, Steal a line from Deadpool. It's an educated wish that we don't
It's an educated wish.
it's an educated wish that we don't get injured. But
I
we
forgot
can
about it.
we can make educated guesses and decisions based on how we are as a mover, how we are as a person, and what we need for our sport and what we don't need, right? And I think that's when injuries creep up, there's always something behind it to learn, right? Whether it's the reason we do it, whether it's the ins and outs of why we do it, it's the reason like why we shouldn't be doing something. And I think that both of us have dealt with enough because we train at a certain level. I think with me, one of the biggest things when I started coaching that helped me progress was fucking myself up so many times. I remember when I first made the switch really from like competing high level CrossFit. Well, I wouldn't say high level because I wasn't high level, but competing in CrossFit, trying to compete at a high level, trying to, do some of the stuff that you'd see these high level guys do.
Being highly competitive. There you go.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I just wasn't competing was the problem.
Yeah.
But I was like I was training as if I was, which was the issue. And then stepping out of that because I was so fucked up into a phase of like, all right, I just want to get healthy and move better. And now I've been kind of dipping my toes back into that. I want to perform, because I signed up for the triathlon. There's other things that I always want to do, like jujitsu, like just training in general. And you're going to get fucked up as you try new things and as you push yourself to that limit. But I think that, you know, one of the things me and Jared were having a little conversation before this, and one of the things that struck me that he said was the recovery gets quicker every time, right? And I think that one of the things we start to see as we get injured more, we have, because one thing I see as a coach, and one of the things that bothers me as a coach is that when I have clients that get injured or when I myself deal with an injury, I start to learn what to do, right? And very much early on, you can tell me your experience on this in a second, but like very much early on, I was like, something hurt, stop. Like just stop, right? I've learned very much that when something hurts, it's not to the point that it's like keep going, get through it, like push through, no pain, no gain type thing. But it's more this thing where it's like, okay, we have to explore where the pain is coming from. And we have to find what isn't causing pain and what is causing pain. And I think a lot of times when we have pain that comes from the body, it's telling us something, but we don't have to just stop, right? We can explore and there's tons of things we can do. Like this morning, just to kind of go back into my story a little bit before I hand it off to Jerry, I, probably should have taken a rest day yesterday. Make a long story short, I went to my first ever mosh, and that was an experience.
A
Uh,
mosh?
yeah, like hardcore music. Have you ever seen this stuff?
Like a mosh pit?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's your first one?
yeah. That
Dude,
was the first.
blast. Yeah.
And Martin, who is my jujitsu instructor here in England, invited me. That's like his favorite thing to do. He's like, "Oh, I go to like 2 shows a week." He's like, "You should come just to check it out." I was like, "All right." I don't really like that's not my scene, but I was like, I'll go look. And we were there pretty late. I didn't get home till late. It was an experience and a half. A funny ass story on that. We can talk about it later if we have more time. But it was my first experience. Got home super late, didn't sleep well, and I woke up early just because of like the clock that I have in my head. I woke up super early on Sunday. I was just dead. I was like, "Ugh, I don't know if I should do this." So I got up and I just started moving. Went to go for a run. Ended up running for 30 minutes. And then this morning I woke up and I was feeling good. Went for a run. Got to the gym. First exercise I did at the gym. A little bit of like a twinge in my shoulder. I was like, it's just gonna be one of those days. And basically was like in my head, like, don't go crazy, don't go crazy, don't go crazy. And then I did my second exercise and boom, hip goes. I was like in the gym, like by myself. There's people around me, and I just had like 26 kilo dumbbells in each hand. I just threw them, and I was like, fuck. And I just turned around, and some kid was like looking at me. I was like, oh, I'm so mad at
You're
my
next.
yeah. So, it just kind of popped in my head to talk about this, right? Because I think that when these injuries come up, it's so easy to just get pissed at myself, which I am, right, in the short. But it gives me an opportunity to really sit there and say, all right, what the fuck happened? What did I do? Right. And those days before, right, that's a sign when you wake up and you're like, I don't know if I should do this. To a certain extent, when you're not competing, when you're not in a space where you have no reason to go that extra mile. Oh, let me say this because that's not true. When you're in a space physically, right, you learn from this stuff enough that you know when you're good to go and when you need to take a step back, right? And I think yesterday was one of those days where I should have taken a little bit of a step back and I said, fuck it, right? And I paid the price. And the price is wrong today. So like
Price is wrong, bitch.
the price is wrong. So, Jerry, you know, things you've dealt with, experience with injury, just talked a lot there, but I think that as we start to learn about this stuff, you and I and the experiences we've had, injury comes, injury goes, but learning from that makes obviously that recovery, that situation a lot easier to handle. And yeah, I guess what are your thoughts on that in this context?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I'll make a very long story as short as possible, but I mean, it goes back to the reason I got into this industry is because I tore my rotator cuff. I heard it when I was like 20, 21 years old. Um,
What's
and I wanted to make sure,
shit, I'm 29. Fuck, I keep saying it. 29 and 30 now.
yeah, I'll be 31 in December. So it's coming up there, but almost 11 years ago now. Jeez, that's crazy. Anyway,
Damn,
um
you tore your rotator cuff and I was fat.
I mean, I was a skinny little bitch anyway, but it was one of those things that I wanted to understand why it happened, prevent it from happening again to me, any injury, and also help other people with the same thing. So that's why I got into exercise science and became a coach. Um, but it's one of those things now that I have had that injury, I know more about it. I know what to do to make it heal faster and but then there's other things too. I mean, I around like 24, I injured my hip. It's been on and off since then. When I was 14, I scorpioned really hard. And if you don't know what that is, I was on a trampoline and I got double bounced unexpectedly. I
Oh,
landed on my chest and I kicked the back of my head so fucking hard that I locked up. And ever since then, I've had nonstop like spasms in my back throughout my teen years and then like into early 20s. And then I found out basically what was happening through school. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's why this is happening. And I found out how to fix it. I've worked with other professionals as well and got their opinion. And now, like, what would keep me out of commission for a week takes maybe sometimes 30 minutes and I'm back to my fit, which is insane because I remember I couldn't move. I couldn't basically do anything because of my back. Um, but it's one of those things like it now I know what I can do to work around it, not through it, like Brandon said, but around it. and what I can do to make that healing process move quicker. Um, but at first, it was just stop. It's don't do anything. I didn't do anything, even with my shoulder. I didn't do anything with my legs because I was terrified. I was like, if the body needs to heal, I must stop moving, right? And that's obviously
I
not
think,
true because you could do other things for lower. You could even do other things for upper as long as you're moving in a pain-free range of motion.
yeah, I think one of the things too is that exactly. It's like as you get injured, obviously things are going to hurt, but this is why it's so important to have either a professional like ourselves or someone who's experienced it, or just in general the opportunity to just play around because most of the time with this stuff with injury, number one, stopping is the worst fucking thing you can do. Like
Hmm.
stopping everything and just sitting there and doing nothing is more often than not the worst thing to do because it stops like obviously it stops the body from moving, it stops blood flow, and that's one of the most important things for an injury. And, I've even had injuries, like you said, where it's like, okay, it used to take days because I wouldn't move, and it takes so much longer because you don't move. If you can get your body moving and start to introduce, you know, blood flow, break a sweat, sometimes like I'm interested to see how my hip feels, through a night of rest and not doing anything. Obviously, tomorrow morning it's gonna hurt when I wake up. But after that, once I get moving again, once I get through, what I can do in the gym tomorrow, how is it gonna feel? Because I think with a lot of this stuff, you can really just start to move around this and help your body so much more and get used to it and know, because a lot of times with these injuries, yes, something is causing pain and it hurts. But I'm sure if we move around some of this stuff, it's very simple to kind of find what does and what doesn't work, you know? You gonna say
I
something?
want to make a point. You made a good point without actually like touching on it. Is you said in the morning it's gonna hurt when you wake up. That is one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they wake up and they're like, "Oh my God, it's worse," or "Oh
Yeah.
man, it still hurts," and they decide not to do stuff. But oftentimes, like if you start to move and you just like take yourself through range of motion that you can get through, you'll get blood flow to the area. It'll wake it up and it'll start to feel way better, even within like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So like if it does hurt, don't just stop
And I think
all movement.
another like and I think one thing now as we're kind of like talking through this, I think we can kind of give some tips that can help for someone to take away who either has gotten injured or is dealing with that currently. I think one of them is as simple as like a hot shower, right? I've had some
Mm,
things where I was just like, fuck, I am in pain, like, oh my God. And then I take a hot shower and just feels a little bit better, right? And I think one of the worst things is ice. And I'm such a
yeah,
kid of
dude.
icing, and I still see so many people do it. And like being at the level that I'm at with the people that I deal with, and I see the way that they handle injuries, I'm just like, bro, like no, 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 no. And it's such a, you know, I've seen enough people talk about it that I'm surprised it's as like abstract of a thought as it seems when you talk to people. But like icing does nothing for you. Like I'm not even a fan of ice baths anymore. I like and I was actually just reading something today that there was a study that's showing like it has negative effects on
Hmm.
muscle growth, right? And I think icing and ice baths and all this stuff are just and what's the other thing?
Saunas and
No, not saunas, the cold one version of that. What's the thing?
oh shit. You sit in a room and it's just like dry ice is falling on you. Like the mist. What is that?
Cryotherapy.
Cryotherapy, yeah. Yeah.
Like all that stuff is such a load of horseshit because it's obviously it helps, and I think one of the
It's
biggest things with
flashy.
injury,
That's
I think one of the biggest things with injury is getting out of pain first. That's the first step, right? If you can. Well, actually, that would be the second step. The first step is obviously identifying what is the pain and how is it being caused, right? Step number two then becomes how do I get out of pain, right? And I think with ice, cryotherapy, ice baths, all this stuff is because from a scientific perspective, right? And you can correct tweak anything that I say. Ice is going to stop our body from becoming inflamed in a way by basically taking blood away from the area. If we ice a specific area, if you ice your entire body with an ice bath, it kind of slows down this process of blood flow and you start to feel cold and it takes away from this, right? Heat, it it in a way makes it worse or increases the inflammation, right? But we have to understand that our body's inflammation is a healing factor, right? And you don't want to take that away unless it's like to the point where it's swelling and it's like getting in the way of movement or it's going to take away from your daily activity. Swelling is okay. right? And obviously there's different types of swelling and you know there's things you can do for swelling, but if you have an injury in the moment and it swells a little bit or it's a little bit like you don't want to stop it from doing its job because that's what it's supposed to do. Like the swelling is a uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a intuitive thing your body does to help that process. It's getting nutrients, it's getting the things that it needs, plasma, blood, all that stuff to make sure that the body can start to heal. If you start to put, you know, painkillers and ice and ice baths and cryotherapy and you do this consistently, like it's going to stop that process and really is going to take it even longer to get back through, right? The only time I would ever recommend ice is if it's going to be involved with some type of heating after, like directly after. It's like, okay, I'm going to ice this a little bit, and then directly after, I'm going to heat and move and massage, right? But most people either don't have that time or don't have the capacity to do that. And I'm going to let you, I know you want to say something, so I'm going to let you say in a second.
Yeah, I have a really good analogy for you.
Um, and they either just ice and then they leave it or and you know I'll say this last thing, the dude who fucking invented ice or rice therapy fucking said it was bullshit. You know, he said it was bullshit. The rest, ice, compress, and elevate eventually ended up coming out and being like, yeah, it's not as effective as we once thought. Right? Go ahead, just so I don't cut you off.
So
Yeah,
no, 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 you're good. I had a friend when we were studying this concept in college who like struggled a little bit, and I was always the analogy guy. Um,
analogies are great.
so analogies are great because I mean it dumbs it down, but it makes sense.
Mhm.
So the cold, what it does is compress all the veins and the arteries, and it makes it like harder for blood to come in and out. So it keeps all those healing factor components that need to rush in and pull away. It prevents them from coming in or pulling away, depending on when you ice it. Um, I remember my friend, I told him to like think of a glow stick. So when you crack a glow stick, imagine that being the injury, and then it starts to you shake it up and it starts to glow. That's the inflammation. And
Okay.
then if you want that glow to last longer, what do? You remember that? You put it in the freezer
Ah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
it slows down that chemical reaction that allows it to glow, so it'll glow for longer. Like at night, you could put it in the freezer, come out tomorrow morning, and like it'll still be glowing a little bit.
yeah.
But if you were to just let it glow, it'll eventually die out. So that's the inflammation and healing process taking effect, and
Mhm.
then adding ice to it slows it down. So like it might help with pain because
Yeah.
ice is numbing, but it's just gonna drag that out even longer.
Okay.
So
I love
eventually
it.
it doesn't fucking heal.
I never actually thought about that. That's really nice.
Thank
Um,
you.
but
Thank
yeah,
you.
like that's true. That's like one of the that's true because I think one of the biggest things that I end up seeing is these people, like I said, they ice the shit out of their injury, whatever it is. It's like ice 15 minutes on, 15 minutes off, 15 minutes on. And you know, anything ever since I kind of ran into this theory and I used it myself, I never use ice. And then when people use ice, I'm like, don't use ice. And I always get the,
Mhm.
oh, you know, like, and this is
My doctor said.
and this is where I wanted to kind of go with this conversation because, you know, this is, you know, we were just talking about before is like I've had so much experience with injuries. I've studied so much in my life. I've dedicated my life to this craft. When I get disrespected because I'm a personal, you know, I'm a personal trainer who's not a doctor or doesn't have like obviously to a certain extent, right? I'm not going to sit here and diagnose people. You know, I'm not going to sit
Yeah.
here and diagnose people with injuries, and I'm not going to claim to be a doctor in any capacity, or I'm not gonna leave my lane. But with the experience I've had and the amount of times I fucked myself up and the amount of times I've fixed myself, right? The experience alone should be worthy to just sit down and listen and give it a shot. You know what I mean? And I think, you know, sometimes we look at training because of how the trainers are in the industry and the way that some of them act and they don't respect themselves as trainers. Everybody pays the price for it, you know? And I think one of the biggest things we need to focus on is like with some of this stuff, with injuries, with rehab, with prehab, right? It's setting ourselves up so when the stuff does happen, we actually learn from it and don't fucking waste our time after that being like, oh, well, you know, rice, rest, ice, compress, elevate. And that's, you know, that's what you're supposed to do. I don't know if you ever heard, I read a story long ago that, well, not so long ago, but like maybe two, and it was when I had Thrive, I think. Maybe 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. Uh, Tom Brady had a trainer, and I think he still works with this dude. It was the TB12 method, whatever. But Alex Guerrero is his trainer's name, and he was actually a very controversial and like polarizing trainer at the time because he was someone who recommended movement during injury. And one of the biggest stories I read was he had this dude, and I think this is part of how Tom Brady found him, that destroyed his heel, like fell, had something happen in an event or like something that he was doing, shattered his calcaneus, and the doctors were basically like, you're never gonna, you're never gonna walk again, maybe. Like you might not ever, do hiking again. So he got some different opinions, blah, 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 ends up getting, I'm paraphrasing here, but he ends up getting connected with Alex Guerrero. And Alex Guerrero was like, okay, cool. Let's start to move. And again, I'm not recommending if you have a broken bone that you start moving on the broken bone because I don't know the exact process he took this guy through. But from the point at which they started, he was up on a mountain within a year, climbing the highest mountain or whatever it was of his like actual hiking career, whatever you want to call it. And that was an injury that takes a very long time, right? And I think within 6 months he was kind of like back. And one of the things that Alex Guerrero kind of, implemented was movement and movement inside of being injured and finding ways to move around it and finding ways to get the body moving and get that let that inflammation process take place. And I think a lot of people, again, the pain tolerance becomes so high that they're like, all right, I'm going to ice it. I'm going to take a bunch of painkillers. I'm going to take, I'm not going to move. And they do everything to just stop, like everything to make the process worse. Right. And I think that with some of this stuff, obviously, if you're in a 10 out of 10 pain, but pain is a tough thing because it's very subjective, right? Like it's very, right? Subjective.
Yeah.
Like it's a person's feeling of how they're
Yeah.
feeling it, right? Yeah. Um, it's very subjective and like my pain is very different from like a normal person's pain, right? And
Yeah.
I think
Pain
some,
tolerance is huge.
yeah, and it's so different that like it's very hard to say like, all right, how much pain are you actually in? You kind of just have to see, what helps. And a lot of it honestly is mental. A lot of the stuff with pain, it ends up being a very large placebo effect, and so does healing, right? Like if you can put yourself in an environment where you can start to feel up here like you're healing, you start to heal faster. So I think one of the things that with injury, to kind of bring this back just a little bit, like number one, if you are injured, right, you got to figure out like, what did I do or what did this? Like, where is the actual pain coming from, right? And this is very simple. If I'm bending over and it hurts, right? If I squat and it hurts, if I lift my hand over my head and it hurts, right? How can we start to isolate this stuff so we can figure out more and more like where is this pain coming from, right? Then from there, the next step should be okay, well, like I kind of know where the pain is coming from, right? Like, how far can I push it till it actually hurts, right? And then it's like, okay, I know where not to move, but like, where can I move? Like, if I can't extend my arm all the way overhead, can I extend it out in front of me, right? Can I extend it all the way out to my side? If I can't press a dumbbell up overhead, what if I lay down and I press a dumbbell up here, right? And I start to play around with the positions that I can actually move and load the body. Then you start to figure out, okay, well, like, all right, my shoulder hurts a little bit going overhead. Maybe I just change the angle just a little bit and it hurts a little bit less, right? And then we can slowly work our way back into that position as we start to heal, but we're not stopping the body completely, right? And that would be my second step would be, once you figure out where the pain is coming from, now let's figure out, okay, what can I do in the gym, right? I've had people, even myself, like I look back at it when I first time I broke my foot, I regret it so much because like I broke my foot and I was like, oh, I can't do anything. I'm done. And I sat there for 3 months and did fuck all. I just played FIFA and had the sickest ultimate team at that time. But I was I was
I put
killing
the
ultimate.
time in,
I was
essentially.
killing ultimate team. I finished Prison Break. I was fucking killing it. But on that end. But obviously I didn't do anything for like 3 months outside the gym. And looking back, this was part of that learning experience was my foot was broken. The rest of my body was perfectly fine. There was not a single thing I could not do in the gym besides maybe like load the foot and walk, right? Which looking back could have been easily, dealt with. But, you know, there's so much to the body that we can change. And I think that one of the things that people get stuck on is they just don't have the experience and they don't have the people that they can turn to be like, okay, I can't squat, I can't deadlift, I can't bench. What do I do? Right.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's not common knowledge to move through. Sorry if you hear the train right now.
I got
There's
car.
What'd you say?
There's cars going back and forth on the street, so you
All
guys
right,
are
sick.
hearing that too.
I can't hear it on my end, but
All right, good.
that's like it's not common knowledge to continue movement through something like that. So I mean, that's you weren't a coach then, and it was like really early in your fitness career. So like that's something that anyone would have done was just
Yeah,
stop all movement.
yeah, and I think one of the biggest things take away from it is like, if your foot's hurt, that's okay. Don't be stupid. We don't have to
Mhm.
be like doing things we don't need to
Start
do.
playing kickball with that foot.
Start playing kickball. But like like the rest of your body we can do stuff, and I think that what we get caught up in, and even I get caught up in, and is like, okay, well, if I'm not able to do my full workout, am I actually working out? Right. And that's a hard thing. And it's always something I'm going to struggle with because of how I am as an individual. It's like, all right, if I know I'm training for a triathlon and now for the next 2 days, I can't train for said triathlon, it's going to piss me off. And it's going to be like, fuck. But what I can do here, and something that's been on my mind the last couple of days, is how do I change my strength training to better suit this? Obviously, it was too much. Whatever I did was too much, right? And how do I add? I think I need to do some more body work on top of this. I think I need to focus a little bit more on the recovery aspect of it. What are some things that I can implement now into my training that are going to help me improve my body and get better from, like, because the volume of the running and the biking and the swimming is only going to get higher and higher and higher, right? So I need to see what I need to do and how I need to do it to make sure I'm not injuring myself or falling victim to these things happening. And this is my learning experience, right? There was a point today when I got home. I got injured this morning. I walked home and my hip was bothering me. And I was like, fuck, dude. I was like just mad at myself. I took a minute and I was like, all right, like it's gonna go through, right? Like, because my neck was bothering me, my shoulder was bothering me, my hip was bothering me. And realistically, I haven't taken like a full day off in about 3 weeks. And it
Yeah.
wasn't like I was going 100% on those days. Cause that's another thing. It's like I was going probably 90% on like 4 of those days, and the other days were probably like closer to 50%. But it's just a volume. And I think early on in this process, as I implement all the running, as I implement all the biking, as I still continue to lift, as I continue to go to jujitsu, I need a couple days to just chill, right? And not
Hmm.
do anything, and not wake up at 6 a.m. and not push myself into that zone of uh movement so early on in the day. I just give myself my body a chance to recover. And I think as I've learned more and more, it's like it's so important to have that voice from the experience. And if you don't have it, like, I think one of the things is like we're here for it, right? And we have the experience of it, and we could always tell you like what to do. Like so many of my clients, I think this is one of the things that has made, and I want to talk about this more in another episode, but like I've had to move totally online to coaching, except for Ian, because obviously like I travel with Ian. But for the people that I train online, it's hard when things go wrong because you're not there. And a lot of times what I think makes me best is my ability to adjust, progress, regress, change those in workout moments when something does go wrong, right? I'm very quick on my feet. I'm very clever when it comes to the movement change and the movement capacity and how we change these things. And I can do that for myself, but sometimes the people, when I'm not there, I can't see it. Luckily, knock on wood, I've built something online that these people can do these things and avoid this type of injury, right? Or at least minimize the risk as much as possible. But when you learn this type of stuff, you can have these conversations with people, right? We're able to sit down and have a conversation between ourselves and have a conversation with an individual who's like, hey, I'm feeling a little bit down today. Do you think I should still work out? It's like, okay, well, like how the last couple days felt. They've been good, except for last night I didn't sleep well. Okay, cool. When you woke up this morning, were you feeling exhausted, like you didn't want to wake up, or more just like, hey, my body's just, I'm not feeling lifting heavy? It's like, yeah, I'm just not feeling lifting heavy. Cool. Let's adjust it to XYZ. We'll take out, A and B and we'll replace it with XYZ. Cool, great. Hey, that was awesome. I felt amazing. Like that's awesome. I'm glad I didn't not move today, right? Resting, you definitely need to rest. All right. You need to have days where you're not doing anything, but it's very important on those days where, you have stuff that you're programmed to do, right? That we can find ways to make it work, right? And it doesn't always have to be 100% what's on the paper. And I think where a lot of coaches mess up in this aspect of recovery, fitness, rehab, prehab is like what's on the paper they feel like they need to get done, right? And this is where you have to start to look at the individual, look at the person in front of you, look at the people around them, right? Like I think for me, I'm in a point right now where I have more time to rest. I have more time to recover. So like for me, the way I was training was like, okay, I think I can get through this because otherwise it's been a lot, right? I'm training, you can technically say I'm training twice a day, right? Sometimes, I'm throwing jujitsu in there, which is all these different aspects of movement. I just have to be smarter about the lifting, right? Because that's a very demanding thing because I'm so experienced in it and I can push the weights so much that a lot of that takes so much away, right? And if you look at it like this, right? If you're someone who is trying to make the same transition as me, the running and the biking is a very new stimulus, right? Especially at this capacity that I'm learning, but it's taking so much out of me because I'm not used to it, right? And the lifting I'm so good at and so used to that I'm able to push the intensity to a level that it can take a lot out of me, right? So it's like I got these two stimuluses that are like going head to head, fighting for my time, right? And we're running out of time, but we'll talk a little bit more. That are kind of clashing heads up here. And the recovery needs to be on point, the nutrition needs to be on point, and which I'm learning about this stuff because it is so different of a task and a technique that that's it. Now I know. Now I know what to do, what not to do, how I can make these adjustments, how I can still lift for the things that I want to do while still training this stuff, right? Because there's nothing worse than being injured and sitting at home and not being able to move properly or getting up out of bed and feeling it right away or feeling it in your chest. You're like, fuck, this is gonna suck getting up.
Hmm.
Right. Like it's just that thing where it's like, you're not used to getting out of bed and being like, you got to try to get
Yeah.
up out of bed, right? So that's what I've been doing. But I think that, you know, the injury aspect of what we do is so important to realize that it's not the end of the world. It happens to everybody. And the worst thing you can do is to just, wave the white flag and be like, oh, I'm done for 4 weeks, right? And doctors who recommend that, if they ever do recommend that, go find somebody else. Like stay away from
Hmm.
that person who's like, don't move, don't do anything, you're never going to do that again. If a doctor ever says, unless your legs are cut off or you're paralyzed, like, and for them to say like, you're never going to do that again is such a
It's
dumb
always
statement.
horseshit.
It's such a
It's
dumb
horseshit.
statement to say to somebody, right? Because even in today's world where mental illness and things like that are, a lot of this stuff, they get diagnosed with things and then they make it their personality or they make it
Hmm.
like, their diagnosis, they become the diagnosis. It's the same thing with a hip thing. And they've actually done studies on this where they've told people like you have X pain and they're like, "Oh, I have X pain." And then it's like, "Oh, I have X pain, I can't do that." "No, I have X pain, I can't do that." And and this is where this placebo effect starts to come in. And again, not to say that pain isn't real because there is
Yeah.
real pain. Obviously, you get injured and there's things that people have. But with a lot of this stuff, you can work through it if you're smart. Well, you can work through it if you do the right things and you plan everything in the right capacity and you know the right questions to ask, right? And every time you do something and you fuck up, you have a better question to ask, and you have a better question to ask, and you have better answers. This is one of the things I heard very early on that kind of changed my way of thinking about this from Tony Robbins was like, if you're not solving your problems, right, you need to ask better questions, right? It's not you don't have enough answers. It's like you're not asking the right questions, right? So when you get injured, ask the right questions, ask the right people, look at this stuff, play with this kind of framework of where is the injury from, right? Number one, where is the injury from? That's the big thing. Is it my arm? Is it my shoulder? Is it my leg? Whatever it might be, right? Then from there, it's like, okay, I know what I can't do. What can I do? Right. And then from there, continue to find ways to move consistently. And last but not least, definitely give yourself time to rest, right? Don't take all this other stuff that I'm saying and be like, oh, that means I can't rest. I just got to move. Like, no, you got to rest. You got to find times to kind of calm down and relax. But if you can figure out these first three things, you're not going to be completely lost. You're not going to be, feeling like you've just stopped everything because I don't know how you feel when you get injured, but like me, I go fucking crazy because like I love working out, and that's
Yeah,
where
I hate it.
kind of pushed me to the point where I was like, all right, if I know I can't do one thing. There's got to be something else I can do, right? And I know there's something else I can do, but it's just what is it? I just have to see what it is. And honestly, bro, I've had things like this, like I was mentioning earlier, where I've hurt my hip and it just hurts, right? But then I get into the gym, I start working out, and I do other things in my body, and the injury starts to kind of like get better that day, get better
Mhm.
in a couple minutes, get better in a couple days, quicker, way quicker than it would otherwise, right? But you have to give yourself an opportunity to find the pain, work around the pain, get some work in, just get some movement in, and then rest and recover, right? And I think one thing is, again, with getting out of pain, we have to be careful on how we do it, but there are ways that we can do it, right?
Mhm.
I think that, painkillers aren't something I recommend. And again, I'm not a doctor, right? But something that's helped me when I've gotten into situations where it's like super, super painful is taking a painkiller for the max dose for the allotted times for like 48 hours, right? Because sometimes with these areas, with when you get like super bad um like pains or inflammation or just like irritation, right? These areas are just super agitated, right? And they may not be like injured per se, but they're just aggravated or irritated or inflamed. And sometimes it just takes calming down the area just a little bit to help it out, right? And that's something I've done before when it gets super bad. I'm not sitting here popping painkillers whenever I get injured because it rarely happens. But when it does to the point that it's like, all right, fuck, like this hurts, right? Or like I definitely did something. And, a day or two goes by where it's like, all right, the movement doesn't help. This isn't helping, and I've explored some of the movements. I'm able to still move. It doesn't hurt to kind of explore an option like that. We don't want that to be step number one, right? If that's step number one and you're doing that all the time, then the other steps, you're never going to actually get the right answers. And when this stuff happens, you're just going to automatically turn to like a painkiller or ice or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to just recap on that doctor thing you said. Like obviously it's important to go to the experts in the field that you need help with. It's important to know what they're an expert in. Obviously, like sometimes if you hurt your hand and you go to the doctor, they'll send you to a specialist, right? Because that's not their specialty. So like a lot of injuries aren't what they specialize in. Obviously, some doctors might have expertise in it.
Yeah.
But I always use the example of one of my best friends back home, Frank, I'm sorry, severed his Achilles tendon playing
I
hockey. A
I know.
skate came down on the back of his boot, cut it in half.
Ugh,
Um,
makes you wanna
he was
vomit.
wobbling off the ice. He thought his skate was broken, and then he took the boot off, and all this blood poured out into the bench. And he was like, "Oh shit." Um, that doctor told him he would never play hockey again. He would never run or jump again. That was
That's
our junior year of high school. And then after he did his rehab and everything, he was back to playing hockey. He was uh back to running, jumping, back to his normal self. And for a doctor to just like, well, you're done.
I think sometimes it's got to be the case, right? Like, I understand being a doctor, and I'm not, because doctors obviously do a lot of great things, but I think sometimes it's got to be the fact that they cover their ass with that, so that it's not like, oh, I told him he could play hockey, and he went to go play hockey, and he got hurt. Like, it's got to be a way that they just cover their ass and be like, all right, you can't play hockey again. So it's like how like
Like,
if you
don't get
said
mad at
like,
me if you
okay,
can never play hockey again.
well, it's like if I sit here and I'm like, all right, well, you're never gonna play hockey again according to my standards, right?
Yeah.
If they're wrong, it's like great. If they're right, it's like, well, you know,
He did tell me. Yeah.
you know what I mean? And like, but it's just such a dumb thing to say to somebody because automatically, like, I can't imagine in that moment having something I love be like, oh, you're never gonna do this again. You know what I
Well,
mean?
it's like every time one of my clients gets hurt or something, or Um, like I had one client who like he played pickleball and golfed all weekend and he came back on a Monday and he was like, "Yeah, dude, my shoulder is messed up." And I was like, "All right, well, let's see what we can do. Well, I'm sure we'll get it back to normal, but like we have to obviously figure out what's causing the issue and how to work around it." But it's not like I was like, "Well, you're never gonna do anything ever again." Like I'm not gonna be that guy.
Well, it's
Um,
just not realistic. And if you've done it enough in your life, I mean, if
yeah,
you've done enough of this stuff where you've trained as much as we have, or you've done enough studying as we have, or you've been in the field, because I've been in the field almost 10 years now. And it's like I've never not had something. I've fucked myself up to the point where again, I was like, ugh, like literally couldn't talk, like body,
yeah,
and like, to the point where I was like I don't even know if I'm gonna move again this week. You know what
That
I
dude,
mean?
that's me with my back. Like if I
Yeah,
take a breath the wrong way or too deep of a breath, it fucking like I can't do anything. And it
man, it's
seems
tough.
scary, but when you know what you're doing, you know how to work around it, you'll be fine.
Yeah, so I think like the biggest thing to take away from this is if you are injured, if you got injured, if you've been injured, you know, learn from it first. Find the things you need to find, the information, that type of stuff. But don't, it's not the end of the world, right? You're gonna get better, but there's still so much you can do and so much you can explore. And if you have trouble with that, obviously reach out because like I said, we have so much experience from this that we can help guide you. We can put you in the right direction, or we can have a conversation with you about the things you should and shouldn't do, or how to even approach that situation so you know a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
It's such a tricky thing, and I don't want to sit here and make this sound like super easy, right? The only thing I'm saying is from our experience, it becomes easy. It becomes better to navigate and kind of see through the trees a little bit more. Because when you're injured, you're sitting there. It's very much like a well, this pain's different. Like they don't understand what I'm going through, that type of thing. And that's, I hear you and I understand that, right? But all things have principles. And this is one of the things I preach as a coach is that principles always beat methods and everything else. If you have the right principles in place, you can withstand any storm, any situation, any bad decision that you make, right? It's about those principles, those daily things that you build all your decision making off of. That's what helps us learn and gets us moving in the right direction, right? It's funny because I just posted about that on Instagram this morning. So check it out. Go to my Instagram. My 5 pillars for health and performance. I was actually wearing the same jersey. So I didn't film it this morning, I promise. But yeah, so I think that's a good way to end it. I think that injuries suck. We all gonna get them though. You know what I mean? There's no way to avoid it. There's a way we can minimize it and put ourselves in the best position possible. But I think it's just also understanding like in fitness, I keep going back to this because it just keeps popping up in my head is there is like fitness is movement, right?
Hmm.
And there's so many ways to move that like if something's uncomfortable, just don't fucking do it. And I mean,
Yeah.
like, what's the point? Like, I always find myself when I deadlift, right? I like deadlifting, but I always find myself when I conventional deadlift, I always end up either my hip starts to bother me or I end up getting hurt. And one of the things I've been doing this last couple of weeks that I haven't been doing the last 2 months was like deadlifting consistently. And I think that has something to do with it, but it's like I don't have to do it, right? Like
Like
conventional.
you don't have to compete and actually
Like I
like do
don't
that
have to.
lift.
Like, there's
Yeah.
so many other ways I can move weight off the ground in a hinging fashion, whether it be, and it's probably a little bit better for what I'm doing, anyways. But
Hmm.
RDLs, dumbbell RDLs, single leg RDLs, things like that. There's so many ways that I can move and load the body and load these ranges of motion that if something doesn't feel good, I don't have to do it. It's cool. It feels good to deadlift 450 pounds, right? I've been there, done that. Don't need to do it again. You know what I mean? Like there's just no reason for me to do it again. And I think that I've gotten to that point where I'm just like, even today was one of those things where I was doing things, I changed things in my programming to match what I thought was the goal I wanted to take. I just don't think it was it. I think it led to this and that's it. Now I just got to change it and I got to get back into what I think is like ideal for me from a top to bottom perspective for programming, right? So I hope that makes sense. I hope you guys enjoyed this because I think that it's a tough conversation to have, especially as I'm sitting here with my fucking hip killing me and
My
Jared's been
back.
dealing with some shit like the last couple weeks as well as he's moved to LA. But yeah, so this will be on YouTube. This is going to be on Spotify. This is going to be all places that you can listen to your podcasts, wherever that may be. So check it out on YouTube. Check it out on Spotify. If you guys have any questions, obviously let us know. And we'll see you guys next time. Peace.